Good afternoon. Wonderful to see so many of you here, and a real privilege to come straight after Sharon. Whether you are a hospital midwife or a head of midwifery, a paediatrician or a peer supporter, a community midwife or a GP, a health visitor or a health commissioner, we each have a role to play in increasing breastfeeding rates. And as Sharon has highlighted, if we work together, the whole can be so much greater than the sum of its parts. And I believe that together the potential to radically increase breastfeeding rates is really significant. In the next half hour, I'm going to be sharing with you some new tools, some new resources, national resources, that can help that potential become a reality. But first, I'm going to show you a very short film, just to remind us all why we should bother.
Imagine two babies born in different places. One of them is 6 times more likely to die in infancy, more likely to be admitted to hospital with life-threatening infections, more likely to grow up with a lower IQ and a higher risk of childhood diabetes and obesity. This is not a contrast between Britain and the developing world. It's the difference between being born in Birmingham and Hampshire.
These unacceptable health inequalities, established in utero and early childhood, track into adulthood, and they're recently highlighted in the Marmot Review, which is really worth a read if you haven't yet had a chance to. The review reminds us that people from the lowest socioeconomic groups are likely, on average, will die 7 years younger than those to the most affluent groups. And there's a 17-year difference in disability-free life expectancy. These inequalities aren't just unacceptable for the families and the individuals, of course, suffering from them, but also to us as a society on every level, just from the basic principle of fairness, but also from the cost perspective. Every year, managing these health inequalities costs us £55 billion. That's in loss of productivity due to illness, loss of taxes and welfare payments out, and of course NHS health costs. The Marmot Review doesn't just highlight the problem, it also takes a strategic approach and looks at 6 policy objectives that could drive forward a change. And in my talk today, I'm going to focus on the work of Best Beginnings and work elsewhere going on in the UK, really focusing on giving every child the best start and about strengthening the role of the impact of ill health prevention. So Best Beginnings, the charity I founded in 2006, is all about focusing on this wonderful window of opportunity from preconception to a child's second birthday, where the foundations for a healthy life are laid. It's about working then to affect change through the child's life. We work innovatively, collaboratively, and most importantly, from the evidence base. There are a number of areas we will work in moving forward. For example, we have a plan with working collaboratively, developing something with the Fatherhood Institute, supporting men and women in the transition to parenthood. But the first big nut that we've decided to crack together is working to increase breastfeeding rates. And in terms of health inequality, there's no single slide that I feel shows it more than this. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this. It was given to me by the Department of Health, and it looks at different interventions and the impact they have on infant mortality. And looking at the top and the bottom circle, you can see increasing breastfeeding rates so that there are no inequalities in initiation is 4 times more effective at reducing the inequality gap than reducing teenage conception rate by 44%. And as a group, we're aware of the need and the benefits, the health benefits that it confers, but how are we going to ensure that the managerial grade individual's initiation rate is matched, or at least that people from the lower socioeconomic groups are as likely to initiate? How are we going to stop this shocking drop-off? If you're got a 6-week-old baby and you're under 20, only 14% of those babies are going to be getting any breast milk. How are we going to create a society where quotes like these are a thing of the past? You want to fit in, what the others are doing, be a sheep, And this kind of bottom line one, breastfeeding doesn't look right. I think it will feel funny, horrible. How are we going to do that? Well, I believe that by working collaboratively, we can and will affect change. And my aim is to work with you all, locally and on a national level, to take the UK to a tipping point where breastfeeding becomes the norm rather than the exception to the norm. It's about taking a strategic and collaborative approach to drive forward change. We heard this morning from Lindsay the incredible change programme that they've initiated at the Royal Wolverhampton in terms of bringing in water birth where it hadn't been there. It's amazing what can be achieved when there's a will. In white, here are a few projects that we have planned, and if you're interested in getting involved, for example, as a stakeholder in the Premature and Sick Baby Project or the toolkit for school children, come and find me after in the break. But for the remainder of this talk, I'm just going to be focusing on national initiatives. Some of them are things that Best Beginnings have led on, but I'm also going to be signposting you to some fantastic resources that are out there to help you all in your roles. The first thing I'm going to focus on is the manifesto. The manifesto was founded in 2006. It was the first project that Best Beginnings got involved with. It's a 7-point plan, and it's about putting pressure on policymakers to help create a society where women feel enabled to initiate and continue breastfeeding. It's about ensuring that UNICEF Baby Friendly is in every hospital in the UK as the minimum standard, all the way through. Any one of these interventions isn't going to be enough, but all 7 can really lead to a change. And the power of the coalition is in its collective ownership. No one organisation owns it. We've come up with it together, and actually today you can sign up to the manifesto either on the Best Beginning stand or the Unison stand. They've got sign-ups and a manifesto poster there. To date, 399 parliamentarians have signed up, and over 9,000 people just like you and me. So if you haven't signed up, I'd really urge you to do so. You can also do it from the manifesto website. Something that you probably won't be aware of is a number of trusts going UNICEF Baby Friendly have asked how they can get involved, how they can connect through to the manifesto. And we've now got a new thing called the Breastfeeding Manifesto Friend. And drop me an email or email this address or come to the stand to find out more about it. There are a number of guidelines there. There's a number of policy drivers, and things are shifting. We now in England have regional coordinators. We now have an infant feeding lead in each of the 4 nations. England, we were a bit behind the others, but we're there now. So things are beginning to shift. Also, collaboration's reaching new heights. This is hot off the press, but the Department of Health is funding a pilot project with a new scheme that the manifesto has initiated. It's Breastfeeding Welcome Scheme. So if you want to find out about that, send an email to that address or again, pop to the stand. Now on to the Bump to Breastfeeding DVD. How many people here are aware of this DVD? That's very encouraging, brilliant. It's very much a labour of love. I consider it my 3rd child, and it came about thanks to an incredible amount of work and dedication from creatives, from the families that took part, but also funding from the 4 nations. So a huge thank you to everyone that's been involved. Again, it talks to the power of collaboration. When I was at the BBC, I'd make a film, my exec producer might make a little tweak, and away it would go. With this project, we had over 80 stakeholders feeding into rough cuts, giving us their thoughts. And it was about trying to create a resource, or working to create a resource that didn't only deliver to the evidence base, but also empowered and enabled mothers. So there was lots of focus group work that we did. And it very much delivers to the 10 steps. So when UNICEF came to one of the meetings and it was clear that the caesarean birth that we'd filmed hadn't actually been followed by skin to skin, we had to go out and film another caesarean birth, and we were proud to be able to do that. For just a tiny clip, for those of you that haven't seen it, I'm just going to show you the pre-title sequence.
Across the UK, there are families of all backgrounds with one important thing in common. They all want to breastfeed their babies.
You know, sometimes when I'm feeding her, she just looks right into my eyes, and it could just make your heart beat so fast. It's just that most amazing feeling ever.
Get closeness and enjoy it. It's good because of bonding.
You do bond with your other children when you do bottle feed, but it's a different kind of bonding, something that I hadn't experienced before. but I had done through breastfeeding.
Breastfeeding is free. It's always on tap.
I'm quite lazy, so I think that's quite a big issue in it. I don't think I'd like to be making bottles.
And it gives babies the healthiest start in life.
I'm interested in nutrition and health, so I think, it's the best thing you can do for a baby.
It helps them progress through childhood. It kind of helps them through illnesses.
Hopefully you'll not have any problems, any sickness or tummy bugs or ear infections or anything like that. Hopefully the milk that he's getting is going to prevent all that.
If you breastfeed, your baby is less likely to suffer from diabetes or obesity in later childhood. Breastfeeding is good for you too. It can help you lose any pregnancy weight and help protect you against some cancers.
It's one of the best things, I think, for us. And I love times like this when we're quiet and we're together and it's just the two of us.
He's so happy and content being on the breast.
I wouldn't really think of giving him anything else.
So how do you get started? As we follow 9 very different women and their babies learning how to breastfeed, this film will show you.
Best Beginnings works from the evidence base and the resources we create, but it's as important we establish whether or not the things that we do are effective. So we commissioned Baum University to undertake a robust independent evaluation of the DVD. They're still writing up the report, but I can share with you some preliminary findings. It was a 3-phase design. The first phase was before the DVD became available. It was a cross-sectional study with 3 groups of women, mid-pregnancy, late pregnancy, and then 6 weeks postpartum. And they use the Iowa score. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's a validated scale that looks at attitudes, perceptions, and knowledge. And 865 women completed all the questionnaires. And perhaps not hugely surprising, but somewhat depressingly, there was no difference. So across those 3 points in time, it seems that the progress through pregnancy doesn't lead to improved knowledge. Well, that's what this study has shown, which actually does lead to the question of whether we should be getting to people younger in childhood. But I'll come on to that in a little while. Phase 2 was a longitudinal study, so it was one cohort of women that were followed all the way through. And in all, 488 women completed all 3 questionnaires. And all I've got for you now is some of the key headline figures, which was that 93% of women had received a DVD, which was actually surprising because the evaluation started very soon after the DVD became available. But of those 93 that received it, only 71% actually watched it. So there's a fair few there, 29% that weren't watching it. But of those that watched it, 99% found it useful antenatally, which was great news. 83% found it useful postnatally. We're hoping that's because they got all they needed from it antenatally. But interestingly, 89% had watched it with their partner. So I'm now working with the Department of Health. We're redoing the cover. They're printing the next 600,000. So we know for sure another year's supply, and we're getting a dad on the back to make sure that we really engage fathers, as we know is the way to go. This is just a little bit of feedback, a much smaller study, but it got sent to me by Kim Kennedy, who's an infant feeding lead in Barnsley, and this is some local audit that they did. And interestingly there, 96% of women are watching it, and that's with a really focused programme. It's about the words a midwife uses when she gives it to a mother. So that's aspirational. If we can get to those sort of level, that's great. But there doesn't seem to be a drop-off in the number of people who found it useful. So even when you get it to those more difficult-to-reach mothers, they still seem to be enjoying it, which was very encouraging. So the findings from the last phase, which was the qualitative stuff, they did in-depths with mums, younger mums, and also from healthcare professionals, was that the young mothers were liking it and recommending it. And interestingly, the mothers who were formula feeding still enjoyed the DVD and said things like, maybe with my next baby I would breastfeed. But midwives aren't discussing it enough, and it was clear that distribution could be more consistent, structured, and effective. Just a couple of quotes from healthcare professionals. There is this sense that if it's used properly, it can be really effective, but we're not being given enough time, so some thought around that. and just a few thoughts from some of the young mothers who were interviewed. I quite like the last one. It's not just old people who breastfeed. And actually this is borne out. I got a lovely email from an infant feeding leader in Culverdale. She had a young woman, a 16-year-old, I thought it was a 16-year-old, who was going to her baby cafe antenatally. She'd never had an antenatal teenager in her baby cafe. She said, "What are you doing here? How did that come about?" And the young woman said, "Well, I saw that Bump to Breastfeeding DVD. I didn't realise that ordinary women breastfed, but now I know they do, so I've come to find out more." So things like that are incredibly heartening to hear. On our stand, we've got a leaflet about how to use a DVD, because it is not a magic wand. It's just a tool, part of the toolkit, and it's there for you. It's free. Over 900,000 have gone out, but we need to make sure that everyone that goes out and gets into the DVD player and not onto the shelf, or worse still, in the bin. So I want to move on because I haven't got much more time. I just want to signpost you to a few things that you might not be aware of. This is a wonderful resource that Dr. Kath Ryan has created. It's called Health Talk Online. That's a huge project, but within it there's a breastfeeding module. And have a look. There's some wonderful clips of mothers with all different experiences, and then you can signpost some of the mothers you're supporting to it. And of course we've got Start for Life with new leaflets out or about to be out. And the ChiMat Observatory. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this. It's a really good new resource. It's there to provide commissioners, planners, providers with relevant information. There was a mapping exercise of breastfeeding services in London, and that's now going national. What's brilliant, it's a live data set, so you can interrogate it to ask questions that you want to ask. So with this particular graph, that was someone looking at how teenage mums were associated with lower uptake breastfeeding rates. So this is the national service. Helen Duncan, who heads up ChiMat, has given me her email address to share with you if you want to find out more, having been on the website. She's really happy to hear from you. We've got, of course, the commissioning guide that came out in the last year, and crucially this UNICEF document that helps everyone build a strategy. But it's also about grassroots and driving that cultural change. This is my last clip.
From the policymakers to the grassroots. Best Beginnings commissioned some of the UK's most talented new artists to design iconic images that would challenge people's perceptions of breastfeeding. The result, the Get Britain Breastfeeding exhibition, currently on tour across the UK, and a nationwide poster campaign throughout the NHS.
This is a photo of the exhibition at the RCPCH. It was good to engage the paediatricians in the existence of the DVD, and we took the exhibition along too. Just been great to see so many of you at the stand, and 21 PCTs now have the exhibition in their areas, and my aim is to get as many school children, young people seeing it during Breastfeeding Awareness Week, and I know there's lots of plans afoot. If you want to bring it to your area, come and have a chat with me at the stand. I'm on to the very last section of my presentation. I saw this slide the week before last at a meeting at the Department of Health, and some of you, in fact a lot of you in the room, would have worked very, very hard to make this data exist, and this is all about the 6 to 8 targets, looking at real breastfeeding rates at 6 to 8 weeks. For those of you that are familiar with the 2005 study, the Quintennial Survey, we have breastfeeding rates there at about 50% by the time we get to 6 to 8 weeks. But when you start collecting real data on the ground and you see the reality, the picture is even less rosy than that. And what's also interesting, these are all the different regions. I don't know if you can see at the back, but on the left you've got the South East Strategic Health Authority, and they've got the lowest rate at 30%, but they've also got the highest uptake. So to the right, in orange, there are the SHAs that have less coverage. They're not yet getting all the data back. And as you can see, the more data you collect, the more you reach those more difficult to reach mums, the slightly grimmer the picture becomes. But at least we know where we are now. We know the journey we have to go on, and we know how we've got ways to begin to get there. But it is a huge challenge. And it's when I see graphs like this that I remind myself. I'm going to share with you a story. So it's not a long story, but it's really helped me on my journey, and it was told to me by my late uncle. His name was Professor David Baum, and he was the president of the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health. Some of you will have heard this story, and it's a story of a young man on a beach. On the beach, there are hundreds of starfish, and he's tirelessly picking them up and throwing them back into the water. But for every one he throws in, another 10 come rushing onto the beach. And this old guy's on the cliff, and he's looking down, and he's thinking, what the futility of this? Can't he see what's happening? So the old guy walks down to the young man, and he says, can't you see, for every one you're throwing back, another 10 are coming onto the beach? And the young man picks up another starfish, and he says, it makes a difference to this one. And during the last 2 days, I've heard incredible initiatives, incredible work happening at grassroots. And I feel that with that energy and with that drive, and with the policy drivers and with the resources, we can and we will get there. There are many people I'd like to thank. I could have done 3 slides of thank yous, and I should have put at the top, and I want to really focus, is the parents, the families who've taken part. Now on to my last slide. Best Beginnings is a charity. I'm not sure many of you know how small we are. We're a team of 3. And when we made the Bump to Breastfeeding DVD, it was made thanks to support from the 4 nations. There isn't the same statutory funding that there was. We're now planning a resource for every premature and sick baby in the country. And if you want to get involved in the project, come and let me know. But also we need to raise vital funds. I would encourage you all to join me on my bicycle, cycling to Paris in September, or to consider giving even £5 a month. Every penny makes a difference and helps us continue with our work. Thank you very much for your time.